So, Victoria, can we start?
Absolutely.
Right, okay. All right, thanks everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's HNO 2021 HNO process webinar. My name is Antena Gabriel Dobamo. I lead the GNC operational support team. In today's call, in this webinar, I'm joined by Marcus, who is from OCHA Geneva, who will be leading us on the HPC process. And then followed by that Victoria, who is GNCCT Nutrition Information System Help Desk. She will take us through on the more nutrition specific HNO guidance. After that, we have also Masumi, GVB specialist from UNICEF MOPS Geneva. She will take us through the cross-cutting aspect of the HNO process. And finally, I will talk about the role and responsibilities and the GNC support section of this presentation. Once again, I would like to welcome you for joining. Next slide, Shabib. So as I said, the first section will be on HPC process, followed by the HNO needs analysis guidance, which is more nutrition specific, then cross-cutting issues, and finally the roles and responsibilities. So we'll hope to finish this in about 90 minutes. And after each section, we will have about maximum 5 minutes for Q&A. If you have any question, you can post your question on the chat box. Myself and Angeline will be monitoring your questions. You may also raise your hands during the Q&A session after each section. So in this webinar, Shabib, next slide, please. We hope to give you an overall guidance for the 2021 HNO process. We particularly will be talking about the key considerations you need to take in the 2021 HNO process because there are new nutrition HNO guidance, which was out back in July. And also OCHA annually, as usual, releases overarching guidance on the HPC process. So we have the 2021 HPC process guidance. And also we have the JIAF, Joint Intercluster Analysis Framework, which was also out recently. So based on this recently published guidances, we will try to give you some key considerations you need to make in the HNO process. And also it's important that we make, as usual, this process consultative. And also we need to know our individual responsibilities, that it is done in a more effective and consultative way. So with regard to that, I will, at the end of this session, I will be speaking about what would be our role as GNC team to support you in the process, and also your in-country role as coordination team in making sure that there is a very active participation of the cluster of the sector partners. So with this introduction, I would like to hand it over to Marcus. He will be talking about the HPC process in general. So welcome, Marcus, over to you.
Hi everyone, this is Marcus Elton from OCHA's Assessment, Planning and Monitoring branch. Do you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'll be walking you through a few basic slides around the humanitarian program cycle, a quick update on the latest developments, and then we'll leave a bit of time for questions if there are any that I'm happy to answer right after the presentation. I understand in today's webinars we have a mix of colleagues who are quite familiar with the program cycle. But also we have colleagues from maybe operations who are less exposed to sort of a formal humanitarian program cycle process, who have now maybe finding themselves in a country that's included in the global humanitarian response plan for the COVID response. So what I'll try is to balance a little bit the next few slides, so we're all on the same page. So bear with me maybe if some points are too basic for those that are more experienced, but I hope it will help other colleagues who maybe are less exposed to this to quickly grasp the key ingredients, which are not that complicated, by the way. Next slide, please. Oh, there was a jump, yes. So in terms of the main outputs of the humanitarian program cycle, I hope you have already seen or contributed or are currently involved, is the development of a shared understanding of the humanitarian situation. And that is being captured what we refer to as the Humanitarian Needs Overview, or short HNO. The Humanitarian Needs Overview is intended to inform the Humanitarian Response Plan, the HRP. And the main key elements from the HNO and the HRP, they will feature in the Global Humanitarian Overview to be launched in December. The whole simple idea from the program cycle is that we conduct jointly the needs analysis, and that forms then the basis for the collective strategy. And what we've been working on with you guys and other clusters over the last few years is to continuously improve this process, so it becomes more comprehensive, increasingly forward-looking, and prioritized. That is certainly something where also donors have been insisting on, that we are responding to more and more emergencies, but with comparatively less funding that goes with it. So the emergencies are outpacing actually the funding over the last few years. And then this is also out of collective understanding and planning. So there's a sort of authority behind this work. So those are the three main outputs of the program cycle. Most operations are in the middle of the HNO right now. You yourself have probably already had some meetings. You might also be quite advanced depending on the context you work on. Next slide, please. So from those basic steps to what we are trying, what the shift is that we've been trying to engineer collectively over the last few years. If you go back to the first HNOs and HRPs, they tend to be rather sectoral exercises. So every sector does their own analysis and comes up with their plans. That's still largely the case, but what we're really trying as a collective is to strengthen this intersectoral element. And why the emphasis on this? There's difference indeed, and a nuance between multi-sectoral versus intersectoral. Multi-sectoral in the sense of that is one sector next to each other, but maybe often we miss then the overlaps, the linkages, the interrelationships, the causalities. So the idea is to strengthen the intersectoral element. So thinking of issues and our collective response as a whole across sectors, think about the range of factors that collectively influence humanitarian conditions and situations. So that is really the idea, and then maybe to arriving that we can build an evidence base that also helps then with collective planning. And the whole idea of this, what we label the enhanced APC, is to provide a single, comprehensive, cross-sectoral, methodological, sound and impartial overall assessments of need, as opposed to compartmentalized. Now, for nutrition, much of that is already a little bit how you are used to work, because nutrition is per se already obviously an intersectoral topic. But in the bigger picture, we still see a lot of each sector obviously doing their good work. So how can we bring that better so our collective response better meets the needs of the people we serve? So in basic terms, that is what the enhanced HPC is trying to achieve. Next slide, please. So we've heard a lot about the JIAF and some guidance we've been working on. So this year we worked on formalizing and putting on paper the joint intersectoral analysis framework. I doubt that many of you had actually the time and energy to go through the whole document that was shared a couple of weeks ago. No worry if so, there's still time to dive into that. So we worked on the JIAF guidance. A big chunk in there is how to calculate PIN. There is additional guidance on collective prioritization, response analysis, formulation of strategic and specific objectives. So that's more on the planning side, which the JIAF tries to inform and does so now more systematically. There was an update of the step-by-step guide and the HNO and HR templates to better reflect these elements. I would like to say that a lot of the heavy lifting or the big shift actually happened already last year for colleagues who were engaged last year in developing an HNO. There already the HNO reflected very much of what we see now in the JIAF. So it structures sort of the qualitative analysis that already that change happened already last year. Also, those who were there last year might remember a different way of calculating PIN. And this, last year was still, the guidance wasn't so clear, but this year around, we could really clarify how to calculate PIN, and the big shift is going away just from taking an estimate that the sector provides to the collective and then coming up with a total. Now it's much more driven by actually using indicators and looking at severity and using those two elements to come up with a PIN that's hopefully a little bit more robust. It's not necessarily an easier exercise, but certainly a more rigorous one. So these big shifts actually started already last year, and the guidance that came out this year, I would argue, to a large extent confirms what already has been done last year in terms of conducting joint analysis and developing an HNO. So quickly, so these are sort of the new guidance pieces. They have been shared through multiple channels. If they haven't reached you, then we can follow up after this and make sure that they do reach you for those that are interested. Next slide, please. So this slide also a little bit to bring up colleagues that maybe have been less involved in this. If we dive further into this program cycle and distinguish between the HNO and HRP step, then there are a few basic steps which are none of them actually surprising, but that's sort of the sequence, the suggested sequence that is suggested in the guidance. Some of these steps will happen in parallel, but in order to demonstrate them here, they are presented as a step-by-step. So every exercise, be that for analysis or planning, starts to agree on the scope of the analysis. To really collectively engage in what should we be focusing on, what do we include in the analysis, what can we exclude in the analysis of humanitarian needs, where do we need to draw the boundaries. Depending on the context, this might be geographically, this might be very much depending on the groups, on information gaps you might find yourself. So all clusters are invited to engage in this and make a case of what should be focused on, but also already think about what is maybe too much to capture or shouldn't fall into the humanitarian analysis because it's better captured in other areas. And then the second step is to undertake secondary data review. I would assume in nutrition you follow a similar sequence here to first look what information is out there, try to analyze that to our best abilities, to see where there are information gaps that we should fill with collecting primary data. This year with COVID, obviously our capacity to collect primary data is severely restricted, and I'll be curious to hear how you are dealing with that when it comes to nutrition surveys. And then the fourth step, and this is sort of what the JIAF is trying to support, is really to conduct this joint intersectoral needs analysis. And the JIAF provides here, I'll show afterwards, the framework to provide a simple structure to help connect the dots, if one will. So to bring all the clusters together, yourself, and really engage in a joint intersectoral analysis, to move away just from this multisectoral, to look at the intersectoriality, how problems interrelate, how problems from different sectors overlap and manifest themselves in vulnerable groups, etc. And those are sort of the key ingredients then to inform the planning side. And again, there, the first step will be to define the scope of this HRP. So what is going to go into the plan and what is beyond the scope of the plan, and then to formulate very initial objectives for our collective response. I would argue probably the newest or most sort of strengthened aspect then is this conducting a response analysis within that. So really looking at the operational context and having a discussion about how can we then best achieve these initial objectives, and how does the operational context limit this or determine this, and how we work together, access issues, etc. What are the best means, the best ways, the best approaches to try and address these objectives. And then after, in a subsequent step, is about finalizing these strategic specific objectives, agree on indicators that allow us to monitor and know the planning cycle, and to engage in this prioritization discussion. And at the last step, we're really at the project and activity level, where the projects are formulated, while we estimate the cost of the response plan. In reality, obviously, a lot of this work already happened at the cluster level. And I'm not sure about the timing within the nutrition cluster, but some clusters start earlier and some later. So some of this work might have been done. Some of it hopefully will still be influenced by this collective thinking. Over time, I think there will be more linkage in there. Wouldn't be surprised if there's some de-link, however, still persisting in the field around this. And then the last point is this, obviously, learning from the application of the guidance, lessons learned, looking at what's most practical as we then enter each cycle over time. Next slide. I realize actually I could have skipped the slide, jumped the slide further, because actually detailed already a little bit what's in each of this step. When it comes to agreeing on the scope and focus, it's really to adapt also the framework to the context. So even if the JIAC provides a structure and a reference, it can be adapted to additional context. Maybe elements will have to be highlighted, etc. But here I'm repeating a little bit what I just went through. Is there any points I jumped? No, we can go to the next slide, please. While I here also actually went through these points. So good, okay. So the next slide, please. Here's a screenshot of what the JIAF conceptual framework suggests. And for those that did engage last year, you will see how the HNO structure already mirrors this to a large extent. And the simple idea of, or in its most simplest term, of the JIAF conceptual framework is really to have these 5 pillars, or these 5 boxes you see here. The last box, current forecasted need, is considered the 5th one. It looks like one box, but it's actually a separate one. So it starts obviously with looking at the context, at the political, economy, security, infrastructure, whatever it might be, looking at the context. and try to understand that, and then to look at the events or shocks that happen to this context, so the drivers and the underlying factors, be that, let's say, a sudden onset event like a cyclone, or an escalating conflict, or a slow development of degrading food insecurity, and people having to leave, change their livelihoods, leave their areas, etc. And what the impact is of that on access, system and services, and the impact on people. To have there sort of a clear distinction. And from there on, to go and try to understand what does that mean then in the humanitarian conditions that they result in. So really then to think about what does then this mean in terms of the living standards, the ability of affected people to meet their basic needs, and to see what indicators out there help us to measure these. Again, obviously this may depend from context to context, but this will be then about essential goods and services, healthcare, food, education, rule of law, shelter, water and sanitation, etc. And then also there's a subpillar of the coping mechanisms, which is used to understand and assess the degree to which individuals, households and communities are coping or facing challenges with impact recovery. Understanding the severity of these coping strategies they are relying on to cope. Coping mechanisms obviously can be positive or negative, but it's really sort of to capture that element. And the third subpillar refers to information indicators about the physical and mental health of affected populations. So this means measures and observations around morbidity, mortality data, malnutrition outcomes, psychosocial, physical impairments, injuries, trauma, etc. And if there's data available, could also include grave human rights violations, etc. And obviously these three pillars are, as you see, as hinted in the illustration, they're interrelated. They don't happen next to each other. They're all interrelated. There's not necessarily a linear sequence or how needs evolve. There exist feedback loops between those pillars, and they all can then lead to negative outcomes. So by looking at those three sub-pillars, and the idea is to come up with an estimate of severity of needs and to help then stratify people in need by severity. You see that already very much done for few years within the integrated phase classification, which all of you are probably more familiar with than I am. But it follows that same logic, that same spirit. And then the fifth pillar is really to take all this information and run the analysis through it and think about, okay, what does that mean then in terms of the planning horizon, usually the 12-month of the next year? How will needs evolve in this upcoming planning horizon? And that is sort of that then should help us with the collective planning. All right, and then not to go on much more longer, next slide, please. This, as you see, the HNO structure then follows the logic of this framework. Obviously, you have a summary at the beginning, but in that part one, in the impact of the crisis, there is where you start with the context, you go into the impact. You explain the scope of the analysis, and then it goes into the humanitarian conditions, the severity of people in need, and number of people in need. That's the part one, which follows very much this JIAF framework, and that hasn't changed that much from previous years. This implies also that not everything that has been done last year in terms of analysis needs to be repeated for this year. If sort of the analysis of the situation, the context has been done well, last year the situation hasn't changed so much, then the analysis this year can focus on the changes or on issues that haven't been covered so much last year. Last slide, please. And there you see in the HNO structure, that is certainly something which there's more emphasis on now, is that part 2, that risk analysis element and the monitoring of situation needs. So having in there a bit more of a collective risk analysis, trying to understand what are the main drivers and shocks. In there, it's encouraged that country teams really sort of think through what's the most likely scenario. How will the situation evolve most likely over the next few months? And then to agree on a simple monitoring of the situation needs that allows us to quickly pick up on dramatic changes. And then the part 3 is where you certainly will be asked to provide some analysis. Those are all the sectoral chapters. The sectors are more or less free in how they want to structure that. Obviously, it's encouraged that the sectoral analysis helps feed the intersectoral analysis so that there's some alignment, but it's really up to the sectors to decide how they want to do this, how they want to present this information. And then there's a whole list of annexes. Voila. With this, I think I already gave a lot of information. I'm happy to, maybe it's most helpful to maybe take some questions or doubts or queries, which I'm happy to answer. Over to the facilitators.
Thank you so much, Marcus, for for this comprehensive presentation on this overarching section. We will open it for Q&A, and I'm not sure whether you have posted question on the chat box, but you may want to raise your hands and we can take a question one by one. Angeline, is there any question received on the chat box so far?
Not that I can see so far, no.
Okay, so if anyone had any question, you may raise your hands and we can spend the next couple of minutes on Q&A.
I can also offer, if some people still need to digest a bit, if questions come up later,
Okay,
you can send them to me or give me heads up, and I'm happy to dial in back later. That shouldn't be a problem. I would just need a little heads up from you.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Marcus. In case we receive questions relevant to your section, I'll be alerting you. Thank you. Then we move to Victoria. Over to you, Victoria.
Great. Thank you very much, colleagues and Marcus, for that great introduction and overview of the HPC process. If we just remember the previous slide, the sectoral analysis, so the section 3, this is where this newly released guidance, the Nutrition Humanitarian Needs Analysis Guidance, that has been developed. So it's much more focused on the sectoral analysis. You probably have already seen a number of webinars and some points from this presentation that I'll be sharing again today. But it's much more to provide a bit more the overview of the guidance for all countries, whether a cluster is already activated or not, if it has an existing HRP or not. So it is quite a comprehensive guidance to support any nutrition humanitarian needs analysis that may be needed. It was recently developed over the past months, so since January until about end of May, thanks to funding by USAID and also through a specific task force from the Global Technical Assistance Mechanism for Nutrition. So today, what I'll be focusing on is a bit more the steps of the guidance that are relating to the HNO and HRP process. What are the key indicators? And how does that feed into the nutrition situation analysis and PIN calculations, with a primary focus, once again, for that sectoral analysis piece. But you'll be seeing that if anyone has dived into the JIAF guidance, there's a number of alignments. So already in terms of the indicators, as Marcus highlighted, this year the JIAF guidance is focusing much more on the indicators and the raw data. And we'll be seeing that the indicators provided in this guidance are entirely aligned with those that are looking to be contributed from the nutrition colleagues for the JIAF intersectoral analysis. So I'll get into that in a bit more detail in the coming slides. For specific COVID related, as we've also mentioned previously, this guidance does refer to a number of the briefs that have been released through the GTAM mechanism. And there's now 2 briefs, so I invite you all to check those out. We can also provide those links to the briefs, but they do provide guidance not only on primary data collection, the use of a variety of methods, but also when it comes to the nutrition situation analysis, particularly for this year, if it is primarily based on secondary data review. So I'll be touching upon some of those points briefly as well during this presentation, but I also invite you to take a look at those briefs, as I believe they would have some valuable information for you all. Next slide, please. So in terms of the steps of this guidance, generally we start off with the development of an annual data collection plan, so that kind of first section of the guidance. But here we're going to be focusing on now how can we use existing information to conduct a nutrition situation analysis. So once we already have our data compiled and consolidated, how can we understand now the severity and magnitude of a given humanitarian situation across affected geographical areas based on the needs of the population. And of course, the purpose of the nutrition situation analysis is to guide strategic and operational decision making. So it addresses how severe, when, where are the most affected areas, how many, why, who, and what are some key characteristics of the situation. As Marcus already highlighted, you know, the aim of this analysis is really to build consensus on classifying the severity based on the magnitude of these nutritional needs. So here looking predominantly at the prevalence of different forms of malnutrition of vulnerable population groups, so those who are most at risk, and the key drivers, so contributing factors, to support the response. A number of the majority of this nutrition situation analysis is based on the integrated phase classification acute malnutrition framework. And we use this framework, not only that it's adapted UNICEF conceptual framework that we're all very familiar with, but it also aligns with one of our scenarios where across the guidance, we have 3 different scenarios at hand. We have a number of countries who generally perform an IPC acute malnutrition. So they have global acute malnutrition levels for children under 5, which is above 5%, and an analysis can be conducted or utilized. I'm aware that a number of countries right now are currently undertaking their IPC acute malnutrition analysis. So therefore, those countries would only focus on the recommendations put forward for scenario 1. If you do not have an IPC acute malnutrition that can be conducted after consulting with the GNCCT team or the global support unit, and global acute malnutrition for children under 5 is still a primary concern, so a prevalence above or equal to 5%, then you would fall into scenario 2, and specific recommendations would be are put forward in this guidance for that given scenario. In other contexts where the global acute malnutrition levels for children is less than 5%, so not perhaps of primary concern, but maybe different forms of malnutrition are more concerning, then that would fall into scenario 3. So the full guidance is based on these 3 scenarios, and you would follow which scenario and recommendation would best fit your purpose. Based on that, then we would identify the key figures for the HNO and subsequent HRP. I'm just looking if there's anything else to add. No. All right, next slide, please. In terms of core list of indicators, so as I mentioned, we have a number of indicators that we're putting forward as recommended, really to streamline this analysis process, but not to override the extensive list of indicators that can be used for nutrition programming or monitoring purposes. In this list, so primarily focusing on the nutrition outcomes or those nutrition specific, looking at IYCF, so infant and young child feeding practices, all of those that we're putting forward in our sectoral analysis are the same ones aligned with the JIAF intersectoral analysis. So when it comes to contributions from the nutrition colleagues for the intersectoral analysis, we are going to be using the similar list of core indicators that are provided in this guidance in Table 1, to be more specific. And each of these indicators are organized based on category, but also the alignment with the IPC acute malnutrition framework that I mentioned previously, and also by humanitarian consequence or condition, where we see that there's certain indicators that will be more relevant for certain scenarios over others. So for example, here at the bottom of the screen, if you could see with the little writing, apologies for the small writing, is the prevalence of stunting, which would be more relevant for scenario 1 and 2 in living standards. However, for scenario 3, where global acute malnutrition levels for children under 5, it would be more important for the physical and mental well-being subpillar. So there are some small differences, but generally most of our malnutrition outcomes are based, fall within the physical and mental well-being, as they have a direct, they're based on anthropometric data, and the urgency of the response can, of course, depend on the survival and the longer term effects, so acute and chronic malnutrition, death, and morbidity. We also have the severity scale that's provided, so it's aligned with IPC but also OCHA. So the colors are based on IPC, but we also have a similar phase classification as done for the OCHA phases as shared previously, and sources for the threshold. So a number of these thresholds are preliminary in nature because there is an absence currently at global level of a number of thresholds, but we do have some put forward and also to be tested. One thing to keep in mind, of course, is this guidance is for piloting, so I look forward to hearing from hopefully all of you on any feedback and suggestions to further improve this guidance also moving forward. Within this core list of indicators, we also put forward a number of indicators from other sectors that would be what we think at least some key contributing factors, so those key drivers. So those would include indicators from the WASH sector, immunization, health status, availability of and access to health services, and food consumption. So we do have quite an extensive table at hand, and I invite you to review with your in-country colleagues to see which indicators will be most appropriate for your sectoral analysis, but also which ones would serve to contribute to the JIAF analysis based on their scope of analysis as well. Next slide, please. When it comes to conducting a nutrition situation analysis, this brings us back to those 3 different scenarios. So once again, if you are following in scenario 1, where an IPC acute malnutrition analysis is being done, you will focus those results for your nutrition situation analysis based on the results from the IPC acute malnutrition analysis. Quite straightforward. If you cannot do an IPC acute malnutrition analysis, so now entering scenario 2, the severity classification is based on GAM for children under 5 based on weight for height. And the reason for this is that thresholds are provided globally, as much as perhaps one day we would have thresholds for the aggregate indicators, so the CGAM that probably a number of you have been already aware of, where that is a composite indicator that looks at all suffering from global acute malnutrition based on weight for height, based on MUAC, and based on edema. So it's more comprehensive, but right now there are no thresholds provided at global level. So therefore, right now for the guidance, we're suggesting that the severity classification is based on GAM based on weight for height. If that is not available, then we suggest basing the severity classification on GAM based on MUAC, And if in rare circumstances that information is not available, then GAM based on MORAT for pregnant and lactating women. In either case, a qualitative analysis of contributing factors should accompany the nutrition situation analysis based on these 4 criteria. So here we're looking at whether it's not a contributing factor, so phase 1, a minor contributing factor, a major contributing factor, so those falling phase 3, and critical contributing factors, so those phase 4 and 5. So it's based on a qualitative analysis per indicator that is considered a contributing factor. We would then rate how does it fall according to the scale. For phase scenario 3, so when prevalence of under 5 global acute malnutrition is less than 5%, a severity classification is using a bit more complex scoring system, which is of course proposed. It's not based on hard evidence, but through the task force that was led by the GTAM, a number of colleagues put forward 10 indicators that could take into account the vulnerability of the target groups and also the reliability of the indicator themselves. So I'm not going to get into which 10 indicators, but you can see that is a large variety of indicators ranging from chronic malnutrition, overweight, so looking at the double burden of malnutrition, but also micronutrient deficiency, so looking at the triple burden of malnutrition, and also infant and young child feeding practices. And once again, it would accompany the severity classification would be accompanied by a similar qualitative analysis of contributing factors. Next slide, please. For now our third section of the guidance, so the preparation of key figures for the HNO, once we've done the severity classification, then these results lay the foundation for a coherent and efficient humanitarian response based on the magnitude identified. And it's really understanding this magnitude identified that we could have an understanding of how can we guide the response. So the number of people in need, so this PIN, right now the guidance focuses on how to calculate it per sector, so our sectoral analysis, but also upcoming, I'm working already on the addendum on how can we provide those contributions for the intersectoral PIN calculations. It will differ quite a bit from the sectoral analysis because sectorally, we are not aggregating our PIN numbers. So there will be some key things to take into account. I know a number of colleagues already on the call have already been aggregating PINs previously, so they will be more familiar with this, and so it shouldn't differ greatly from previous years. It's just more how we can streamline it in a more similar fashion. So we'll be working on 3 different tables, so per category of nutritional needs. So here we have acute and chronic undernutrition and overnutrition, and then PIN calculations and formulas for IOICF practices, and those for micronutrient deficiencies. So we're looking at really having PIN calculations for particular population groups for minimum subset of key nutrition-specific interventions. And the PIN should be calculated for each of these specific nutritional needs and expressed as such. So once again, for nutritional needs, remember that for nutrition, the HNO already serves as a projection, as are malnutrition outcomes. The majority of them are already based on an estimated incidence of people that need the specific service. So that's also quite unique compared to other sectors at hand. Also, the information, when available, and hopefully at least by age and gender, but also by disability. We also provide some indication of some rough estimations, if none are available at country level, on disability status and what does that represent in terms of a percentage of population. But our colleague Masumi will also provide a bit more guidance. Next slide, please. So here is just a quick snapshot of some of the tables that are provided in the guidance, where you can see per nutritional need. So here's IYCF practices. We have all the PIN calculation and formulas, and even the indicators that can be considered. So hopefully it provides a way to really streamline this process of calculating the number of people people in need per nutritional need. A lot of needs, yes. Next slide, please. And lastly, hopefully the best part of the guidance, at least in my opinion, is an accompanying spreadsheet calculation tool to facilitate these calculations. And it is including sheets that's kind of the one-stop shop for conducting looking at the data in terms of indicator registry, the classification of thresholds, but also in terms of conducting a nutrition situation analysis, looking at evidence repository, the reliability of methods, but also keeping track of the analysis team composition, similar to the IPC acute malnutrition tools, and also specific sheets for scenario 2 or scenario 3. Of course, for IPC acute malnutrition, although the nutrition situation analysis will be led by the IPC colleagues, the preparation of the key figures can also be done using this tool for the IPC analysis. So that's also one thing for the colleagues in that scenario 1 that have an IPC acute malnutrition analysis that will be put forward. And we also have automatic calculations for the PIN. So all those formulas that I was showing you have been translated into automatic formulas with a full sheet to insert relevant country level population figures. And so right now we have age and sex automatically there, but also for disability, it's very easy just to take one of the sex columns, so those for girls or boys, and add the percentage there, and you could already have the disability results disaggregated, the results disaggregated by disability, apologies, automatically. So it's the worksheet is quite easy to use, and I'm sure the information management officers will have tons of feedback to give, but hopefully it'll be very useful to once again streamline these analysis and preparation of the key figures for the HNO and subsequent HRP. And just lastly, keep an eye out for the JIAF addendum that will accompany this guidance. It's already in draft form, and in the coming weeks it should be released to just further provide information on what would be the nutrition contributions for the intersectoral analysis that was described extensively by Marcus. I think that's it on my end. Anthony, do we want to continue, or are there questions?
I think probably we can take questions. I see 1 or 2 questions on the chat box. Angeline, did you manage to capture them? We can address those questions, and if there are also more questions, we can take questions for the next couple of minutes. Angeline, over to you. Or
yeah,
you want
I mean,
to cover it?
Victoria, did you see the questions from Jacinta? One about the differences in terms of GAM at different geographical areas, and also one relative to the coping mechanism.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I was just and then another one just came through. Okay. Let me just open them fully.
Cecilia. Okay.
Wide discrepancies. So thank you, Jacinta. If there's wide discrepancies, the question is, if there's wide discrepancies at subnational level on GAM, could we use different scenarios for different geographical areas? Absolutely. The main thing is to just document these assumptions so that, you know, the severity classifications I showed will differ. So it's just to make sure that you're clear on the severity classification was based on scenario 2 or scenario 3, but absolutely there can be a mixture of both scenarios within one country. Excellent question. And why is nutrition not considered the coping mechanism humanitarian consequence? So nutrition generally has a direct effect on the lives of individuals. So in terms of, when we look at acute malnutrition, but even if we have high acute malnutrition, it may lead to increased mortality. So this is why it falls under the physical and mental well-being consequence. We also have a question from Ethiopia, country of scenario 2, is the district Rwanda, and there's 900 Rwandas, but GAM prevalence is available in only 15 Rwandas. We have results from LARC screening. Sorry, it's quite a long question. So I think in terms of this scenario of looking at it really comes down for the colleague from Ethiopia, availability of information. And once again, not all countries will have, not all districts or Rwandas here, in the case of Ethiopia, will all have the same evidence. And I think it's more, it's really how can we document each assumptions of what information was available per Rwanda and why certain information was used over others. So if how to overcome this challenge, I'm more than happy. We could have a call with the colleagues from Ethiopia to discuss this further. But having of information will be expected, particularly this year, as a number of primary data collection activities have been suspended due to COVID. And another question to the PIN calculation for SAM and MAM. What is the latest thinking on the correction factor? Great question. So there was evidence shown in terms of the SAM correction factor that was released about a year or year and a half ago through colleagues at the UNICEF headquarters. So depending on what the country has accepted in terms of incidence correction factors, it is more open to use what is now currently being used for the incidence. For MAM, there hasn't been, from what I'm aware, further thinking on the incidence correction factor specifically for MAM, given that the research that was led previously was only based on SAM related data. So therefore the PIN calculations right now is based on generally the standard incident correction factor that has been more widely used, but at country level, if you're already using an adapted incidence correction factor, to please use that one, as well as just documenting that that one has been used. And then we have a colleague from Jean-Jacques, how the COVID will impact PIN and how to integrate the PIN calculation. So of course, COVID is quite complex, and there's not a clear, will it lead to significant deterioration or minimal deterioration? Right now, it's not entirely clear. What I would invite colleagues to do is check out the briefs that were released in 1 and 2, as we provide some suggestions on how to work, particularly with the confidence intervals of existing secondary data that will be the primary source calculations, and looking at what would be a plausible point prevalence, duration, looking at recent programmatic data, a significant amount of service interest. Believe that the PIN calculation point prevalence instead of the existing what it is currently. So I will leave it there. In the brief, it details quite a bit how to take that into account, but once again, I'm available to support colleagues with that decision makes, bilaterally as well.
Thanks, Victoria. That's very helpful. There's another question on the Q&A section from Salua. Do you have any recommendations about data sources for scenario 3? And we're wondering if public health surveillance system information could be used for that.
Absolutely. Hi, Salua. Yes, I'd say what, we're this year, particularly since COVID has suspended a number of primary data collection activities, there will be a wide range of sources that maybe in other years won't be the primary sources of data. So I think the most important thing is at country level to decide in terms of available sources, which one would be most reliable in terms of collecting that information, and then based on reliability, then those would be the, you would decide what are the key sources to take into account for whatever scenario you may fall in. So if in the case scenario 3 or scenario 2, or even for IPC, I know the colleagues are also looking at a wide range of sources when undertaking an IPC acute malnutrition analysis this year.
All right, there is 100, I think it's Jacinta. Jacinta?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I just want to follow up on my question on the coping mechanism, because it has huge implication on how we do the intersectorial analysis. While scenario 1 and 2 consider living standards under stunting, I worry if we leave out coping mechanism because we see, because of the humanitarian consequences, the quality of diet, the choice most of the population make, cheaper source of nutrients can be a consequence in terms of malnutrition, both overweight and underweight. So if we not only look at one, very severe consequence like SAM and MAM, then the analysis will not be complete.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
So in terms of your question, generally malnutrition outcomes, so we're looking at acute chronic malnutrition, overnutrition, micronutrient deficiencies. These have a direct effect on people's survival, mental and physical integrity and or dignity in the short term. They could also, of course, have longer term effects. So generally for nutrition, these indicators, which are primarily based on anthropometric data, fall into this consequence. We can certainly, here in our table, we're not highlighting the coping mechanisms, but if there are other indicators that fall under the coping mechanisms, humanitarian conditions, these can be part of the qualitative nutrition analysis. So that's part of the contributing factors. So we're just trying to streamline which indicators would be at the forefront of the severity classification versus those based for the qualitative contributing factors analysis. Does that make sense?
Okay, maybe we'll discuss bilaterally context.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So thank you, Victoria, and thank you, colleagues, for the questions. I think we can move to the next section. That would be Masumi, who will be covering the cross-cutting aspect of the need analysis. Masumi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anton, and thank you so much, Victoria, for interesting presentation. So here I'm presenting cross-cutting issue, especially focusing on AAP, GBB risk mitigations, and the disabilities. And here, so cross-cutting issues, we really focus on some of the population groups who are vulnerable, who are likely to excluded from participation or services. And it's really, especially it's important for nutrition actors, because those vulnerable populations who are likely to be excluded from services, who are likely to be excluded from the information and so on, are also likely to face higher risks of malnutrition, and also even have additional challenges to accessing to nutrition services. So it'd be really, really great if we can integrate cross-cutting issue meaningfully in your analysis. So for our AAP, the really focus here is just making sure that the affected populations, especially those who likely to are forgotten, are excluded from the decision making, are included. For example, normal household surveys are normally focusing on men, but really to kind of make our extra effort to understand the women's and girls' opinions or persons with disabilities perceptions into the analysis. And we understand that because of the COVID-19, primary data collection would be challenging. But in these cases, for example, working with local organizations such as local women's organizations or local organization for persons with disability could provide additional information that really maybe can help for you to interpret and then analyze some of the data. Next, please. Yeah, can you click one more time? So for GBB risks, it's just why we do GBB risk and mitigation is to making sure that services are accessible and safe for, especially for women and girls. So to do that, it's really important to understand what are the GBB related safety risks associated to nutrition programming and nutrition services. And also as a part of it, what are the barriers that the children and women are face when they use or access to the nutrition services. And the last part is the coping mechanism, because again, the emergency or disasters or conflicts does not affect everyone or samely. So for example, the risks, what kind of information we are asking is, for example, are very typical risks, GBB or safety risk is the distance to nutrition services or location. If the location is really dangerous, then it's really hard for anyone to access to services. This is some of the typical risks, but also we hear a lot in different countries that women face, for example, domestic violence at home because husband doesn't allow women to go to nutrition services or any other services without husband to approval. And the husband didn't really understand the importance of nutrition services. So there's quite a lot of different risk factors that our users, especially the mothers and women lactating, pregnant and lactating women and girls face when they use or access to services. And some of the information sources is I know that some of the nutrition colleagues are doing already safety audit, so that data can help you to understand. Also, MSNA from Protection and Health normally includes some information of safety or safety concerns in the locations, and also access to the barriers to health services. So it can also provide a good information, maybe at least the ideas on risks related to nutrition services. And the also capacity of nutrition workers, especially for GBB aspect, because many women, vulnerable women accessing nutrition services, and they might seek support from our nutrition services because they use it repeatedly, while the nutrition frontline workers and women have can establish the trust and a good relationship, and maybe survivors want to seek support from our nutrition frontline workers. So it's kind of important to also understand that if they are ready to support, if someone seeks support from frontline workers. And for coping mechanism, it's like, again, there's, I think, discussion on coping mechanism, but here is like how women and girls, and then others are kind of coping for not accessing food or not accessing to nutrition services and so on. That also would help you to understand the impact of the situation to vulnerable populations. Next, please. And the key part is really for across the different cross-cutting issue is the barrier analysis. Because again, as I mentioned, the vulnerable populations are also vulnerable to the malnutrition, but they also have extra barriers to accessing to the nutrition services, and then use the nutrition nutrition services and treatment. So it's kind of important to really look at different barriers of different population group face. And I'm just sharing the AAQ framework as example. I'll send the link to chat box later. But some of the information, so it's not only the physical or distance or physical location, but for example, the availability of information or social acceptance. Some of the example I mentioned just now about husband's approval to access to nutrition services is a huge barrier that it's actually happening in different countries. So it's really, really important to look at what are the barriers for women, girls, and the boys to access to services. And then for nutrition, not only the direct users, because they are small, they normally are accompanied by mothers. So what are really the barriers of mothers to bring children to the nutrition services from different aspects? So some of the information sources that you could use is for example, MSNA has a lot of information on barriers access in general different services. If there's no direct information for nutrition, maybe you could use this as a proxy. And again, health actors normally collect a lot of information about barriers and the safety perception around the health. So you could also use this kind of data. And again, safety audit, gender analysis, GBB subclass also do the secondary data analysis. So this kind of information sources can maybe provide our good ideas of what are the barriers for our nutrition services. But if none of those data is available, at least you could consult with, for example, local women's organizations or local, organization with persons with disability to check their perspective, their ideas on what are the key barriers for them to access our nutrition services, because it's extremely important informations. And next, please. So finally, it's for the disability. Actually, it's a similar thing. The key part is the barriers. Again, persons with disability has also barriers to access to services. But again, when it comes to nutrition, it could be also mothers who has a child with disability, or adult persons with disability might have additional barriers to access to nutrition services. So it's kind of important, not only the person with disability alone, but also to think about the families that are mothers who brings the nutrition services challenges. So really, most key part is just what are the barriers and the facilitators of persons with disabilities to accessing nutrition services, and also includes the kind of families living with the persons with disability, as they have different barriers, and also different factors to make our persons with disabilities very vulnerable. And also, or how can we make sure that for example, nutrition services have a system to receive feedback and information from persons with disability, so that services are inclusive and accessible to the children and then the mothers with disability, or the people or the family who has persons with disability. Okay, Antenna, I think it's the end of the cross-cutting issue, so I'm hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Masimi. If colleagues have questions very quickly, we can spend the next 1-2 minutes to respond to questions. You may raise your hand, or you can post on the chat box, but I cannot see any question posted on the chat box, or I don't see also hands raised. So probably we go to the next slide, and if in the meantime, if anyone has question, you may want to post in the chat box. So thank you. I will not be taking much of time here. I just want to remind everyone that it is very important to remind ourselves our role and responsibilities in the HNO process, or in the HPC process in general, because as you may know, we have at least 2 major gaps in in the HPC process in quite a number of countries at different times. One relating to the process. The process, as mentioned by Marcus earlier, it has to be a very consultative process with active participation of partners. It is not meant to be done by a few selected members or prominent agencies or by experts within the just by the experts within the coordination team. It should be a responsibility of all of everyone. So, and that's the process aspect need to be consultative and participatory. The second important gap, which I think we need to really keep in mind and address it accordingly, is the output, the product itself. After HNO need analysis, we have the HNO analysis document. We know the severity of the geographic severity and also programmative severity of the nutrition needs. And also we have the HRP. All these products need to meet certain standards. For example, UNICEF as a cluster lead agency had a commitment to ensure that cross-cutting issues are included. This is a UNICEF commitment to make sure that the cross-cutting issues are mainstreamed adequately in the HPC process. But unfortunately, not every country cluster products meet those standards. So I just want to remind you here that make sure that cluster partners are adequately involved in the process. This is nothing new. This is what we know. This is something we need to do on a day-to-day basis. But in this HPC process in particular, it is essential that, and it is also equally important to make sure that partners are fully engaged throughout the process. And what tends to happen in some countries is that you may not have any difficulty doing the analysis. You may have the right experts within the coordination team, or maybe within the prominent agencies within the cluster, tend to really involve them, and we really ignore the rest of the partners, which is not the best practice. And so we need to really remind ourselves that this is a consultative process that should involve everyone. And of course, the role of the nutrition cluster coordination team is to ensure that that participation happens and facilitate the discussion, make sure that whatever has been discussed and analyzed or any product which everyone has contributed to is produced. So IM products or the product, the publication of the HNO guidance and so on. And next slide. Lastly, I would like to talk about how we can support you. We have also a role in making sure that the process goes well and the product is also acceptable standard. So Shabib, next slide, please. Yeah, so in the process, as usual, and as we have done it in the previous years, GNC team will be providing remote support throughout the HNO and HRP process. We do it as usual through the help desks. You can reach out to us, to the help desks, and we can provide you a one-on-one support. This is based on your request. And the second one is, I think this should be really a standard practice, a routine practice for every country cluster sector coordination team, that to make sure that whatever draft you have, draft HNO document or HRP document, please share with us so that we can review it and provide you feedback. We review it based on a set standard criteria that assures that the HNO and HRP documents, the analysis and everything, every aspect of the document meets certain established standards, best practices. We do have that checklist. If you are interested to have that checklist, we are also happy to share with you. So what our team does is use that checklist and make sure that all the country products, HNO and HRP, the analysis as well as the response planning meets those standards. In terms of whom to contact, we have two categories of countries. The English-speaking ones, we have Brioni Stevens, who just joined us today. Today is her first day. She is a coordination help desk. She will be a focal person for English-speaking countries. So you can reach out to her, and the rest of us also will provide the support in both in the HNO and HRP process. And French-speaking, Victoria, who was presenting the section on the need analysis, she is available. You may want to reach to her, and you can get the support you need in that way. And in addition, the website, we made sure that the resources we have relating to the need analysis and response planning are easy to access. So we made sure that everything is collected in easy to access location on the website. There on the slide, you see the link to that page of the website where you see the need analysis and the or HPC related materials, you can access it there. So I guess that's what I can talk about the support we can provide you. But again, at the last point, I want to remind you that ensure that whenever you draft your HNO documents, you share with us, and we try as much as possible to respond immediately by reviewing the document and ensure as much as possible. We don't want to be prescriptive, but at least we can give you some tips on how best to improve your HNO and HRP documents. So I stop here, and perhaps if there are last points, comments, questions, we can take the next couple of minutes for that. And otherwise, we could end this webinar. And let me just take maybe 30 seconds to look at if there are any questions posted. Is there any question posted? I only see.
Masumi has shared the AAAQ framework for the barrier analysis. Thanks, Masumi, for that. And just to reassure you, Faisal, that we will be sharing the presentation as soon as this webinar is finished.
Right. So I guess there is no further question, and I don't see any hands raised. So thank you, everyone, the facilitators as well as the country cluster team for joining us, and pleasure to have you. We will share the webinar record as well as the relevant resources after this call. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon and evening. Thank you.